Now we're going to take a look at the spline wrap deformer, and this is by far one of the coolest deformers here in Cinema 4D. It used to only be part of the MoGraph module, but they decided to go ahead and move it over to the deformers. So now we have it right here, okay? The spline wrap works like a deformation object and deforms objects using a spline. An object will move along the spline and will be deformed accordingly. If a spline with several segments is used, each segment will be assigned its own copy of the deformed object, functioning more or less like a cloner. And cloner is something that you'll find in MoGraph, so that's not something we'll talk about in this particular title. Okay, so let's see how this whole thing works. I'm going to go ahead and grab a cylinder. I am going to make the height of the cylinder 4,000. And let's take that and put it on plus Z. So we have something like that. Let's go ahead and make the height segments 50. Let's go into lines mode so we can see what we have here. And the reason that I put these height segments on here, because whatever you're going to deform needs to have quite a few segments. So I think 50 is going to be enough for this example. Okay, so I'm going to go into a top view by middle mouse clicking, and then I'm going to middle mouse click the top view and zoom out a little bit. And what I'm going to do is come up here, grab one of my drawing tools, the B-spline, and I'm just going to draw a path for this cylinder to deform along. So let's come back over here, and we'll end up right there. All right, let's go back into the perspective view. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to grab my live selection tool, maybe grab some of these points, pull some of them up, others down, just sort of getting a little variation here in the height of my line that I have drawn. Just playing around with these and getting something that looks kind of interesting to me. Let's grab these maybe, pull these up. Okay, I think that's going to be fine. So let's go ahead and take the spline wrap and we'll take the cylinder, we'll put it underneath the cylinder. And you'll see nothing happens at this point. And that's because the spline wrap needs a spline to work on. So if we choose the spline wrap, it's asking for a spline here. We'll take this spline, we'll drop it in there. Now we get some really weird looking stuff. So if we come down into our parameters, we'll see the mode is currently set to fit spline. This needs to be set to keep length. All right, now we're getting there. Now it's still not looking right, and that's because we need to set the axis for the cylinder. And right now it's set to plus X. That needs to be set to plus Z. Okay, so that puts the cylinder on the spline in the correct direction. Let's kind of zoom in here a little bit more so we can kind of see what's happening. Maybe go ahead and put a material on that so that we can see it a little bit better. Just drop that onto the cylinder. Let's see if we take that. There we go. I think that might be a little easier to see. Now all we have to do is come over to the spline wrap and play around with the offset. And you can see now that our cylinder is fitting on our spline perfectly. It's very cool. And if you're not getting enough deformation in your object, you can always come back and up the segments if it's not smooth enough for you. But I think in this case, it works out just perfectly. And again, these are animatable, and you know that because of the little dots next to them. Now, a couple things in here. We just looked at the axis. The strength is going to be the strength of the overall deformation, and usually 100% is just fine, but you can adjust that, and you can kind of see what you get there. But like I said, 100% is generally sufficient. Now, the from and to works in conjunction with the fit spline. So if you have the fit spline selected, then you can control, let me just zoom out here a little bit. It's talking about from and to where the spline begins and ends. we can adjust these parameters like that. Okay. But for this example, keep length is what we're looking at. Let's go ahead and take a look at a few of these other parameters. So if we zoom up here on our cylinder and we click on the size parameter, we can control the size. All right. And like on most of these, you can click on here to create new lines by command or control clicking, and then you can control the size in different areas of the object. We have spline size, which is going to work on the spline here, which is not really going to have a whole lot of effect here. It's going to be very similar to what we saw with the size that was affecting the cylinder. Rotation, again, you're not really going to see anything with this because the rotation is going to spin the cylinder around. So you're not really going to see a whole lot there. But it is spinning this around the spline. So most of these parameters have a parameter that's going to affect the cylinder and then one that's going to affect the spline that the cylinder is moving through. So that is the basics of the spline wrap here in Cinema 4D, a very powerful and useful deformer.